Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Pavel Přikryl. I'm a co-founder of Opero, and I do welcome you in our premises in Opero in Prague City Center in the Prague Business Club. I would rather welcome you here in live, which we usually do. As you know, we are quite social and we like to do these discussions and talks in person. But unfortunately, it's not the case tonight due to the restrictions we are having. And so I'm quite happy that we have this technology and we can share the thoughts of Tomáš at least this way. What's in front of us? I'm here to introduce for a lecture Tomáš Sedláček, the leading Czech economist. And of course, he will be talking about the fallout of the current situation of the pandemic of coronavirus. But as I know him, he will definitely take this a little bit further and beyond, and probably talk about what will happen due to this situation in the more distant future. I guess Tomáš needs no introduction to most of you, but still just a couple of words about this. He got well known due to his book, The Economics of Good and Evil, which was translated to 21 languages, and so it's quite a global book. But he was also, he acted in the past as advisor to my beloved president, Václav Havel, but also more recently even to European Commission President Emmanuel Barroso on the future of Europe. And as you know, he's a sought-after speaker, writer, commentator, and so on. And I'm particularly happy that he's actually with us tonight, that you are actually with us tonight, because I always considered you as a person who, well, we Czechs say, has an extra wheel in his brain. and this is, I think, quite a good thing during this situation, because nobody has lived through this situation, and I always know, I always think of you that you are able to sort of think much further in an original way. So I'm quite curious myself what you will bring us. Just from the organizational standpoint, we have 1 hour for this event. And I will leave Tomáš to talk for 30 or 40 minutes. But you are please invited to place your questions into the comments on Facebook, and I will come back here and place some of them to Tomáš directly, so that there is at least some interaction on this. Please, Tomáš, stage is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. I am curious myself because this is the first time that I'm doing a lecture without the audience, and also the first time that I don't have a wall behind me, because they always try to sort of put me in all lectures in front of a wall. But this is something, I'm going to take this off soon, because the Czech regulations, which I actually highly recommend to the rest of the world, are that you can't be in public with open facial expressions. So in about 2-3 minutes, when the virus sets down and neutralizes itself, I'm going to do a little bit of erotic peep show with my face. So that's just for the beginners. Okay, so let me actually start with the global halt. And I mean, this is a situation where the world has never ever experienced a global halt of this dimension, nor anything that comes close to it. We've had war situations, we've had floods, we've had natural disasters where the economy was suspended, but it wasn't the activity that was, I think I can take it off about now, slowly. So the world has never actually been, the economy has never been suspended into not doing anything. So during the war, the economy was suspended. You were not producing your normal things. But then again, you had to fight, or you had to produce whatever the army needed. Or when the floods came, you also didn't go to your work. But you were not supposed to be a hero by sitting at home and not doing anything, which is what happened to the majority of not just Czech society or European society. This is happening all over the world. Now, it has happened before that there was a rest in a society. I mean, it happened in every agricultural society during winters. It happens in nature during the winter. Nature sleeps and doesn't do anything. The bears, they sleep for long periods of time and then wake up with the spring. And this was similar with our human civilization during the winter. We didn't work as hard as we did during the summers. This rhythm of cycles is something that I think should be a key belief of an economist. I mean, to me, an economist is a person who doesn't really believe in growth, but he necessarily, or it doesn't really define an economist for me, but somebody who actually believes in cycles. I mean, cycles is something that we could do a separate lecture about cycles, but just briefly, just imagine there wouldn't be a cycle of the week. Just imagine that there wouldn't be 7 days, but that it would be one day after another, that we wouldn't have the structure of weeks. It would be day 1 of your life, day 2, day 3, and they wouldn't repeat. So in a week, Mondays look alike. In week, Sundays look alike. Friday evenings, I suppose, look alike pretty much everywhere. But it's a structure that's artificial. It's a cycle. It's actually the longest rhythm that we, mankind, are dancing. It's a dance of the planet. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 6 and 7. But that's the rhythm that we've been dancing without a single stop for thousands of years. The rhythm of the week, the cycle of the week, is something that it's very difficult for us to imagine living without. But anyway, so in modern society, the agricultural cycle of rest during the winter and then activity during the summer has been sort of ironed into a flat line, meaning that our agricultural cycles have moved into economic cycles, but not the cycles of rest and activity. So what we have done as an advanced society is that we've your workday will look the same 365 days in a year. I mean, your work, unless you're working in agriculture, I guess it really doesn't matter whether it's winter, spring, or summer. Your work looks pretty much the same. So you can also read this in a way that from some dimension, from some space, you can call it accident, you can call it a signal, you can call it a symbol, whatever you call it, this cycle of work and rest has kind of boomeranged back into the society. And we are seeing it today in your city, in my city, everywhere around the world, be it a totalitarian regime, free regime, be it an Islamic country, Christian country, atheist country. It doesn't make a difference. This beautiful thing about this virus is that it really is absolutely non-gender and non-racist. And it doesn't really matter whether your country is free or totalitarian. Now, so that's one point. Point number 2, that this has happened in individual countries, winter and summer, but it has never worked for the whole planet as a whole. So if you want to look at it a little bit positively on this sort of disastrous standstill, you can say that the whole world has caught a common sickness, we have a common enemy. For the first time in the history of this planet, we now have not one another as an enemy, but we as mankind have all together at the same time having the same enemy, in which we might unite into a civilization of type 1, which is a planetary civilization. This is something that I think I'll come back to later. So you can view it as a synchronized moment of ignorance. We, all of us, don't know what to do. I mean, we have some ideas. Most of those ideas are pretty medieval. I mean, there's nothing that a medieval person couldn't do about washing his hands, try to stay at home, don't let your people go too close to you, and if possible, wear a face cloth. That's not very much artificial intelligence, that's not very much digitalization, that's not very much 21st century, that's very medieval. They didn't do it in medieval times, but if they were told to do it, they would be able to comply. So the whole world is, united in us not knowing how to tackle this entity, which is as old as life itself. Now, there was also a civilization which all of us know, which is the Roman Empire. And back in the early days of the Roman Empire, they only had 10 months in a year, which, should have 12. And the 10 months worked the way that after these 10 months ran out, there were 2 months of actually, not that time didn't pass, not that the days didn't add up on each other, but these days were not counted. It was a no time. It was a non-existent. It was not accounted for 61 days, which virtually there was, during the winter, basically everybody went and stayed at home. So for the first time in our history, the planet is resting. Can we survive this? Yes, we've always survived it. As I already mentioned, back in the days in the winter, we didn't work as much as we did during the summer, and also the example from Roman Empire. So that's one way how to look on this global standstill. It's like a war regime without a war, though. Another way how to look at it is to say how lucky we are that it happened during the period where we already have an alternative dimension constructed. And if this situation were to happen, let's say 20 years ago, it would really, I think, be a collapse of the society. If we kept the regime of curfew at this level, the economy and maybe the society would collapse. But today, it isn't collapsing. It's actually, life is going on. Why? Well, because we have the internet. We have managed somehow, one way or another, construct a dimension through which we can actually work. 70% of our GDP, talking of the advanced economies of the West, are services. They're non-tangible, meaning you can't really knock on 70% of the value. And only 20 to 30% is manufacturing, cars and building off computers and things like that, chairs, windows, this thing that I have on. And only about 3% is agriculture, which is interesting that we only need, so to speak, 3% of our energy to devote to all the things you've ever eaten and drunk, including oysters and caviar and beer and your steaks and your potatoes. That's all 3% to grow, to produce. So the 70% of the economy is possible to be imagined on a virtual space. Now, I have been talking for I don't know how many, maybe 12 years or 10 into the past. I have been giving a lecture which was called, and some of you may even have come across it, it's on the internet. It's called The Great Movement of Nations. And the key idea is that we are no longer moving from one point to another, like during the Great Movement of Nations on this earth, but we are experiencing a great movement of nations, not from a place, but from a place into a non-dimension, meaning, of course, the digital internet. And I don't want to go into everything that entails, but you can see how many things during your lifetime have been vacuum cleaned from the real onto the imaginary. The imaginary real. So I always give an example. I start my lectures very often with an alarm clock, that I ask the audience, which is also something that I don't have today. I have a couple of friends just doing, them so that I feel appreciated. But otherwise, I always ask the audience, how many of you have or are in the possession of an alarm clock? And the raising of hands is very confused because they don't know what I mean, which is intentional. So a lot of people raise their hands, they look at each other, what does he mean, alarm? Does he mean that alarm or some? And then I correct them and I say, well, by the alarm, of course, I understand a half a kilo, thing with 2 bells and there's a little hammer going on and it has got a clockwork and it makes a little ticking sound. That's the kind of alarm that I speak of. And then, of course, almost everybody puts their hands down and there's usually 3-4 people, very proud and looking around that they actually still have the, proper old school alarm. And my next question is, okay, well, those of you who had your hands up and now you put it down, what did you think I mean? What did you think I meant? And they went like, well, we thought, can I have my cell phone, please? I'm just gonna, like, all right. So we thought you mean the alarm clock here. And I said, well, if you open the phone up, there is no alarm clock there. So what do you mean here? And then, of course, the lecture goes on that, what would you call it? What would you call or what is it that you have from the alarm, from the material alarm? What is it that you have here that you still call it an alarm? Because it isn't really similar. This one is for free. It doesn't weigh anything. It's a dimension, by the way. I don't know whether of course you know about Alice in Wonderland. She had this magic bag when I was a small boy. I wanted to have it. You could put anything into it and it didn't weigh any more than before and it didn't also enlarge in space. This is actually that magic bag, because it doesn't matter if you have 1 or 20,000 alarms in it and 1 book or 300, 1 movie or 1 picture or whatever notebook. So anyway, what has moved here is the algorithm, the program. A computer programmer would say maybe application. A hipster would say application. A mathematician would say program. You can call it whatever you want. Plato would call it the alarmness of the alarm. Aristotle would call it the purpose or the telos, the meaning, the raison d'être of the alarm has moved here. I call it the spirit or the soul of the alarm has moved here. And just to make a long story short, you can see how reality is sucked into this black mirror level of dimension. So this has been vacuumed, and meaning my sketchbook, notebook, all my friends are here. My mother is here, by the way. It very often looks like, well, I always, when you're talking to your mother through your cell phone, you're not talking to your mother. It sounds like your mother, but this is not your mother. You're actually talking to a machine. You're alone in the room. Your mother's not there. That's why you're calling her. It's not your mother. It's just somewhat. Also, all your friends are there. Anyway, we've moved our center of gravity, so to speak, into a digital realm within 10 years. It's 11 years since iPhone was introduced. And I had my email address in 1997, yeah. I still remember when I was at the faculty of Charles University, I got my first email. Before that dimension was non-existing. So, but back to the situation with coronavirus, we've constructed a virtual reality. I never ever land like Peter Pan had, but we don't fly there on the wings of a fairy. We fly there through an invisible set of black mirrors. Even you can interpret this COVID-19 situation as a common eye. We now have a common eye. I've just had I don't know how many meetings over the internet. I can now see everything that a computer camera is taking. I can now hear everything that anybody says or records all over the world. I have become omnipresent as long as the network is present. And we will leave here the desert of the real. This is something that you know from Matrix, but it's a famous book, Simulation and Simulacra by Baudrillard. And there you will see, like Morpheus is telling Neo that the real world has been deserted. And this is something that we're seeing for some time. What has happened in these days is it's no longer movement into the digital, it's an evacuation into the digital. We're actually evacuating pretty much everybody Try not to even be, try not to breathe, try not to move, try not to see anybody physically, and don't touch anything that anybody else touched. One of the things that I was talking very frequently is also that touches have disappeared. And this is, again, 6 years back in the day. Some of you remember that one of the things that this has vacuum cleaned is touching. You're not allowed to touch anybody. You're not allowed to touch anybody's feelings. You're not allowed to hurt anybody's feelings. You're not allowed to touch anybody physically. God forbid that you should touch a person. The only allowed gesture was handshakes. We're not allowed to do that either now. You're not supposed to shake hands. How we greet each other is we either kick each other a little bit if we are like a good friend, or we just go like this. You're not supposed to touch. It's like, or when you go to the toilet, and this is already something that's been happening for years, you can do all your shebang without really touching anything, because the doors open themselves and the pissoir, this is in the boys' room, I don't know how it is in girls' room, that reacts, you don't have to flush anything. And then when you wash your hands, that also starts automatically, and the soap also comes out very often automatically. Why? Because it would be terrible if you touch something that some toucher touched before. So this sterile environment is also something that has been growing on this planet for a number of years, and now it has escalated. So the evacuation into the digital space is not happening only because it's cheaper, more efficient, more advantageous. We've been using the internet. It had the black mirror display has a gravity that is economically unjustified. It gravitates me more than it should. Sometimes I just touch it in order to touch it. So my point is, even though touching has disappeared from the real world, do not despair. Your touching is fully compensated by your touch screens. So here you are supposed to touch it. You are supposed to touch it. You're also almost supposed to cuddle with it all the time. I don't know if it happens to you. It happens to me quite often. I know perfectly well, no new text messages, nothing on the horizon, but it's like an instinct. You take your cell phone out and you just check whether the electrons are still listening and whether the world is in order. And you touch it a little bit like, you touch it. You simply want to touch it. It wants to be touched as if it was a ring of power in Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. Gollum, you will recall, has the ring only for touching. He doesn't actually use its magic powers anymore. He only has it as a pure component of fetish without the object. He just takes it out of his pocket and he touches it. And of course, one way how to read the situation is just imagine that nothing here is real. Nothing that you see here, like your mother, it isn't real. If you see a dog here, the dog doesn't exist. If you see a woman in red, the woman to start off, she's very small. She could fit into my pocket. But you don't realize this. It seems like you are seeing a woman. You're not seeing a woman, nor are you seeing a woman in red, nor are you seeing the dog. Your imagination makes it look like you're seeing it, but it's, first of all, 2 dimensions. Dogs only live in 3-dimensional spaces, etc., etc., etc. Anyway, this is non-existing dimension. So one way how to read the cell phone is just imagine our society and unimagine the cell phones. So what is happening is people are doing this. Or this. Or talking to themselves. So anyway, that's one way how to read it. We are lucky that we've managed to construct the alternative Second Life world in which we can socialize, in which we can talk to our mothers, in which we can make our businesses, etc., etc., etc. Now, connected with that, imagine if we play a little bit with the word coronavirus. It has 2 parts, corona and virus. Let me start with the virus. Of course, virus is also a computer virus. And I didn't even dare to ask my 13-year-old son, which would you prefer? If you could choose, would you rather choose this biological virus that prevents people in movement, Or would you, rather than the biological one, prefer a digital virus that spreads into a global planetary pandemic, preventing data from movement? Which one would you choose? And the reason why I didn't dare to ask him was because the answer is obvious. And then when after 3 days, I actually did have the guts to ask him, he looked at me and he, of course, laughed in my face and said, of course, this is way better than a biological virus because I am fine right now. I'm actually pretty happy. I don't have to go to school. I can do my things online and play his games and actually socialize. One of the things that have moved on to the internet is also the playground. That's no longer there. Lego is boring. Now Lego has become Minecraft and the playground has become Fortnite. And it's sort of difficult for me to try and drag my son back into the real world of boomers because you never played the same trick once. So, when I was young, bikes were really cool. I really wanted to have a bike, like a real proper bike that you can fall from. And that was like a big one. Today, the younglings are like, yeah, I don't know. And I was always quite annoyed that they don't enjoy the same things that I enjoyed when I was their age. And then I realized it would be like a little bit, if like my father would come to me and, show me a wooden duck that you can pull behind you and it moves its wings, which I think was really cool when they were young. And then giving it to me and say, look, now play with this for 4 hours, as I did when I was young. So the virtual world, the digital world, is more important for the youngs than the real world. I know these are both interconnected, but if the choice is given, a virus in the biological world is much more preferred to a virus in a digital realm. Well, and then I started thinking about it a little bit more seriously, that perhaps it would really be a bigger tragedy for even the world of us, not truly boomers, but the people who were born still in the real world. In Matrix, they had these plugs, but there were a couple of characters that were born back in the real day and they didn't have the plug. So we're still the generation without the plug. These guys are natives in the digital world, the younglings, the small kids, and even bigger kids. But anyway, even in our world, it would be a bigger tragedy in terms of loss of human lives if the internet collapsed within a week. It would have tremendous economic consequences, but it will also have tremendous life consequences. So that's really interesting. Bear that in mind. I will now analyze the word corona. Well, analyze it, just make an association with the word corona, and then I'll tie the both words together and come up with I think, an interesting analysis or comparison. Now, the moment that I start hearing about coronavirus, because I'm a lay groupie of astrophysics and theoretical physics, I always heard the word coronal mass ejection. That happens to stars, to our sun. Where is it? Our star is somewhere there. You can look at it very carefully. And what happens is a series of explosions that are so strong that they warm up our planet to the point of actually me being able to be here just cloth in this very easy clothes. But what sometimes happens, and that's called mass coronal ejection, is that the explosion is so strong that it rips a little bit of the corona, the crown of the sun. It rips it. The explosion is so violent so that the part of the sun actually gets thrust away, and it travels through space, and sometimes it hits the Earth, but very often our electromagnetic shield, this is a little bit like Star Trek and Star Wars, is strong enough to neutralize, let's say, the highly charged plasma. But every here and now, very rarely, our electromagnetic shield is not strong enough to shield us from the cosmic radiation, and it goes through. And last time it happened, it was the second half of 19th century, so quite some while ago. And it didn't do much. In fact, nobody even properly noticed. Well, people did notice that there was you could see the northern lights that you normally see on the poles where this electromagnetic shield is weaker. So that northern lights you could see everywhere. So people did notice, but it was an entertaining spectacle. But it burned in the North America. They were building the origins or the beginnings of telegraphic grid, and that completely burned down. The reason why people didn't notice is because they didn't use electricity, and they didn't use grids, and they didn't use electronics and transistors and transformers and all that. If the same situation were to happen today, it would burn our grid. In other words, compared to the first example where we would be detached from the internet, in the second association with the word coronal, we would be devoid of electricity. And that would definitely mean mass deaths and a complete collapse of not only our economy, but of our society. The collapse would be so huge, nobody would even ask about economic impacts of that corona mass ejection. So what's my point? My point, except for the part that it's fun to think about these things, is that we are today more threatened by the collapse of new gods, like electricity and internet, than the collapse of old gods, like our biological ability to be with each other. Now, the reason why I call it new gods and old gods is because I really love Neil Gaiman, and especially his book American Gods, which is also, you can see as a series. And there, the basic plot is that old gods like Odin and the traditional gods are now waning in their importance because nobody worships them. But the new gods like internet and social media and others, these two divinities are fighting with each other. So the old gods use thunder, and the new gods use their tricks. And anyway, I don't want to do any spoilers for you. But if you actually use that grid, we are more sensitive towards the collapses of our new gods that are temporal, maybe a couple of months, than a collapse of the old gods. We'll see that this is not completely true. We wouldn't be able to multiply, etc., etc., etc. But a short-term collapse is more painful when the new divinity collapses than the old divinity. So that's another quite interesting thing about the coronavirus that we are experiencing today. Now, let me actually look at the time. We are doing pretty reasonably. Now, since we're doing this in Prague, I cannot not mention the totalitarian regime that we had here 30 years ago. I still remember I was 12, 13 when the revolution came. So I'm still pretty capable of remembering how the situation looked like. It was a city without tourists. It was an empty city compared to how it is lively today. But even the totalitarian regime didn't manage to control the lives of people temporarily, but still as it is today. The city now is empty. It's a ghost town, but the problem is that the city hasn't been, it's full of people. It's a ghost town with the ghost inside of a human, not of a human being, but inside of the building. So this city, if you go into the streets, is empty, but it's full of people, and they're actually, every one of them is retired back into their shield, which is also something that's happening to you and I, maybe without realizing. We've been all over the globe. I mean, my demand and my supply has been all over the world. I was outside my bag of skin. And this situation forces me, especially the closed pubs and restaurants, and I am a big fond of debating things when there is not too much other disturbances, which happens during the evenings. You suddenly sort of retire, you retrieve from specialization. Suddenly you have to take care of your own kids. What is this? I, as a parent, have to take care of my own kids? That's weird that it seems weird to us. It used to be like that always throughout the history that the kids grew up with their parents. And then came very heavy industrialization, ripped the family apart. Father went to work, mother went to work. The kid was institutionalized in some sort of facility. And then in the evening, the tired parents and the play-deprived child met and started usually fighting with each other if it was a decent family. It was verbal. And it seems very strange, but also it is very natural that the family is actually back with each other and together. How will this change our world is something interesting, because we have never been so limited in our lives by any external factor. Maybe we got so used to freedom, this is crazy, and it's not even criticizable. I actually fully agree with these things being necessary. And of course, they are a little bit overdone, but in a situation of uncertainty, that's the safer side than the opposite. But it's something that you should really try and take it as some sort of a signal, some sort of a message that is for our so free society that some of those freedoms have become absolutely for granted. We are taking them absolutely for granted. Going out to have a dinner at a restaurant, that's going to be such a wonderful feeling. 6 or 2 weeks, I don't know how long the closure will last. But the best way your food will taste, if you actually keep a couple of days not eating anything, then a bread with a piece of butter and salt is a festival. So if you can't really go outside, you can still go inside. My last point is, now that I talk about children, is the two big problems or the two big debates we had before the coronavirus came upon us was Brexit and Greta. Now, just think of the debate or the discourse that we had 2 months ago. What Greta wants, that's absurd. You want us to limit our flying? You want us to not use our cars so much? You want the economy to take it a little bit, cool down a little bit, don't go so crazy? And now within a week, everywhere, we stopped flying completely. We stopped using cars almost completely. And the earth and the air has cleared, and it's just unimaginable 3 weeks ago that this would happen. Mind you, the cost of lives that the bad air and pollution is costing us is much more than we have recorded so far with the coronavirus. I'm not in any way trying to be cynical. We should take, and we are taking these deaths very, very, very seriously. But compared to the alarm that we had about the tens of thousands of deaths that actually of people and animals that die because of the overdoing of the economic system, we thought she was naive. You can't stop the economy, you can't slow down the economy. It would destroy us, the corporate profits and everything. It's unimaginable that the world should unpaced, so to speak. And suddenly, it is possible. And somehow we are able, and we, of course, will be able to sustain this and somehow survive it. So that's one of the good sides, if you want to look at it positively, about the situation right now, is that we actually are able to live without doing all this damage. So maybe you can also take it as a break for civilization that is suffering from a burnout syndrome. Our nature has been burned out. Our capital is being burned out. Human beings are being burned out. We spend our lives working at jobs that we don't like so that we can buy things that we don't need so that we can impress people that we don't like, which is of course a quote from one of my favorite movies, Fight Club. Well, now this problem has been sort of solved for you, hasn't it? Because now you don't have to travel or work so hard in works that you don't like. You can't buy things that you don't need because the shops are closed. You can't really impress anybody because nobody's seeing you. So take this as a wonderful opportunity. I will end on a happy note, so to speak. If you ever suffer from the fear of missing out, the so-called FOMO, you can now rest because there is nothing really going on. Not only did they, in my case, close my most favorite place where I would hang out with my friends, they closed all places where you could hang out with your friends. Everywhere in Prague, there is literally, and this word literally shouldn't be overused, but now it's used exactly and precisely in the right place. There is literally nowhere to go. And what's even worse, or maybe better, you can even leave Prague and you can go to Brno, which is a great town, by the way. You can't even go to Liberec or Berlin because there is nowhere to go to in Berlin either. There is nowhere to go to in Sydney. There is nowhere to go to in London. There is nowhere to go to in Liverpool. There is nowhere to go to in New York. So, on the good side, there is no party on the 120th floor with all the pretty people and all the nice pools and all the champagne flowing out. There is no such party which you are missing, to which you have not been invited. So, on a high note of those people who are social, outgoing, like myself, take it as a break and try and see what's inside if you can't go outside. Thank you. Okay, I can see a forest of hands. Yes?
Well, I collected two questions. One is basically based on your talk, and I would be actually quite interested myself. Like, how do you think this social impact will unfold? I mean, you basically said that it's already happening for some time, and the coronavirus crisis only accelerated these things. But I know that you are the social animal yourself.
Yes.
But to what extent do you think the normal will come back? I mean, in terms of like people meeting each other and doing the normal things which we did 3 weeks ago.
When?
No. If this is really fundamental, because you were basically saying that it's a continuous change over the past 10 years, and this only like put it on a steroids.
Right, change on steroids. So the question was, I don't know whether the mic picked it up. It is. Okay, so what I think, and what I'm doing is I'm only using words. There's nothing dangerous about that. I hope in this context. What I'm seeing in my interpretation is that some of it will never come back. A lot of people will be actually realize, especially work-wise, that it's easier to stay at home or have some shared office, but not to go to work. A lot of people do it out of their own will, but I was just talking to a general director in one very important advisory consulting company, and he said that he managed to get his house approved within like a week, and he only had a camera to go through, and normally it takes the minimum of 3 months. It's a very troublesome process. So to our managers, maybe they will notice that a lot of the processes are only because you have to worry about, I don't know, a stupid example is the organization of office space in a bank, for example. that you suddenly don't need. You don't need to order this, you don't need to order this, and you don't need to order that, and you don't need to talk to all of those annoying people that actually happen to sit next to you, but at the end of the day, you don't have to travel to your work and you don't have to commute back. So that's, to some people, that could be 2 hours a day, sometimes lost, sometimes used, but it's 2 hours a day that you wouldn't normally do. I don't see people going in trains just because they like going in trains, or sitting in cars just because they like to sit in cars. Nobody does that, except maybe for a few fundamentalists. But so we might find out, and this I think I'm pretty sure of, that a lot of the work will actually move from offices and from state agencies to a virtual place, and that's going to be much more effective, cheaper, better. Everybody will be happier. I just did a lecture yesterday from my study. It went for 5 hours. Actually, I was very nervous. I'm also I'm a little bit nervous this time because it's my first time. I've been a virgin lecturer when it comes to talking to a camera, but it isn't painful. And yesterday I had a 5-hour seminar, it was a 5-hour workshop with 7 people, and for the first time in my life we did it virtually. We just had a Skype meeting or some program that we did. And at the end of the day, I asked the participants how they felt. So I said, 100% is your imagination of a normal interaction with me. Tell me how many percent do you feel like you've lost? And most of the people were 80%, so they felt they lost 20%. But some of the people went above 100%. There was one guy who said, well, actually, I'd say 120 because, I miss being spat at by lecturers who do, and it may have been a little bit more interactive if it be in real person. But then again, I saved 2 hours. I am sitting here with my pajamas. I have the lecture in my living room. I could take a shower during a 10-minute break. We didn't have to crowd on the toilets. And I actually, I'm not from Prague, so the commute, the parking, this and that, I feel better. And if you ask me, I would say I was on somewhere between 95% and 120% too. It was very surprising for me that it actually worked. You could argue that it worked better. So that's work life. Social life, I don't know whether you've tried it, but we and my friends, me and my buddies, we did do a couple of, party is a weak word. Well, we did do some socializing without socializing, So we actually just called each other. There was, I think, 12 of us. Suddenly there were people from different continents. Suddenly I wasn't limited to my friends that are actually physically near me, although I love them very much. Suddenly you could have friends from Switzerland and from Denmark and from all other places in the United States that actually, why not? Why don't we call, Jason, who's in DC? He's gonna have a little bit of an early party, but Jason never minds. Hey, Jason. So that final word, that party, if you ask me, it was a deeper debate than what I have with my friends when I meet them. So because we spend half an hour talking about where the beer is better this time and this happened and who's did that. There it's deeper. It's a little bit more concentrated, and also you're not talking to all the idiots that happen to stumble upon you and just disturb your nice and quiet circles. So I think some of those changes will be permanent. I even made a bet with one of my good friends who's a singer. And about 5 years ago, we made a prediction that in 80 years, the shoe companies, half of the shoe companies will go bankrupt because people won't need that many shoes. We'll simply have maybe 1 or 2 pairs, but otherwise people won't walk. People won't need shoes for going out because we'll be spending most of our day on the internet. So I think there will be permanent changes. I hope for the better. And going into socializing into real life will be a holiday, I am predicting.
Okay. Well, there is, if I may, another question which I will connect with my question. And this will put it a little bit down to earth, into the really current situation.
Easier said than done.
Well, since you are sitting on both the official and the unofficial advisory committee, looking at this crisis from the economic point of view, what is your expectation on the fallout? On the local level, on the global level. And there is one question also here in the comments, which is somehow connected to that. And it reads, the elite will survive, but the poor are seriously suffering. What would be your advice to the governments now? So maybe from the larger perspective and from the smaller, and you don't have so much time anymore.
How much time do I have?
Well, 10 minutes.
Oh, that's plenty. One question, 10 minutes, that's good. That's
5
five
minutes,
questions for 10 minutes or 5 minutes for one question? Can we do the 5 questions in 10 minutes?
Start.
All right. So yes, I am. I have become guilty of being involved in real life solutions, which I think was strange for me because in the last many years I've sort of clouded myself into the realm of philosophy and anthropology, and those who read my work know that I shy of practical things. Economics of Good and Evil starts with the Epic of Gilgamesh, and it ends with sort of a philosophical understanding of economics. And I think there's so many practical economists that you can miss one and forgive one for not being practical. I used to do that when I was younger. I used to work with President Havel, as you said, and I used to work 2 years. I was at the Ministry of Finance, actually in the mud of doing laws and negotiations and all that. And I actually pretty much. It was a good experience, and then I was serving for a long time as an advisor to the government because of the financial crisis of 2008, 9, and the following years. But then I retired, and I thought that I already gave enough of my time. A lot of that was futile into the services of the government, and now I have been summoned. A couple of days back, I was sort of taken out. I was looking forward to use this period for writing. So I am now in the advisory body. What we're doing right now is we're trying to make sure that the economy it will fall through a lot, and what we are trying to make sure that it doesn't fall like this, that we somehow share the costs of the crises together. We've done that during the 2008-2009 crisis, and that was a crisis that we bankers, we economists, and my colleagues were guilty of. I personally, Czech Republic was the only place where we didn't have to recapitalize a single bank, so I feel a little bit outside, but otherwise it was the fault of us economists. And we were guilty for pretending that we know things that we actually didn't know. And we took a lot of people on a walk down the garden path, I think, willingly or not. And there was a lot of remorse. And in many countries, my colleagues, bankers, literally had to walk through the sewers because people were angry at them. But even then, the government actually made sure that it's somehow that the crisis doesn't have a negative effect on the poor people. Because whenever there's a crisis, it's always the poor people suffering the most. If our pension system collapses, it will be the poor people who suffer the most. If our financial sector collapses, it will again be the poor people who suffer the most. So that's where the safety net has to be, because all things aside, we are human beings, and that's the bottom line, and we have to help each other. This gives me a lot of assurance that the governments will be even more ready to help the poor people. And one of the things that we're trying to do is make sure that there's no group that we forget. And these models are actually quite impressive. I am going back to modeling. This is something, I am sort of helping to build a model, which is something that's strange for me, but it's something also that we need to have in order to be sure. This crisis could last a long time. We thought it's going to be weeks in the beginning, all of us, and then it's rather in the matter of months. And no system, no matter how strong, can survive 4 months of inactivity. So we are introducing measures like all other countries that are short-term. Short-term measure is basically a measure that only changes just parameters. In other words, we're trying to freeze time. We're trying to make sure if the crisis is short, we just want to freeze it and then melt it when the times are fine again. And if the crisis lasts for a couple of months, it shouldn't lead to permanent changes. Now, if it lasts in one way or another, half a year, then already changes will have to happen to the structure of the economy. So we will need huge changes in the way that our economy is done, the way we pay taxes, the way we pay government expenditures. We will even need a supply side restructuring of the economy. We will need to give some work to the economy. My idea is to work on digitalization. Let's actually get rid of all the bureaucracy that we hate in every single country that I've heard of. Even the bureaucrats hate the bureaucracy. And let's try and, sort of, when I was working for the Minister of Finance, very often I thought, so many people are doing, I don't even know, everybody's very busy, over busy, but the final product is sort of hard to see. So very often I was frustrated to the point of saying, maybe we should start all over again on a green field and build the whole thing up and see that it will be 10 times leaner and 10 times more efficient. That's impossible to do in real life, but this is our chance to do it. So maybe instead of helicopter money, which is necessary now, but you can't helicopter money for a medium or long-term period, we should give people some meaningful work. And the second thing is I wasn't very excited about the minimum guaranteed income, because it didn't have any, it was unconditional. I would condition it on education. So you either work for somebody, which is a classical work. Now I sort of work for you. When I make a chair, and I don't make it for myself, make it for somebody else, that's work, that's job. So you either work for somebody, or you work on yourself, which means educate yourself. So there wouldn't be unemployed people, there would be students. This is something that I was studying in Denmark. You actually got pretty impressive scholarship as a student if you were 18 and you lived in Denmark for 2 years, and there was some other condition, but it was a very weak condition. Even I, as somebody from Prague, I was eligible to get this stipend, and it wasn't a super duper stipend, but it was actually pretty generous. You could live a decent, non-luxurious student life off it. So if this lasts for a long time, then let's at least educate ourselves. Let's decrease the level of standard. The wealth of our economy isn't in matter anyway. Matter doesn't matter as much as the human capital, the wealth that's in your body. And there are universities such as Yale, Harvard, MIT, Princeton, very easy to Google, that are offering a wonderful 140 plus online courses. And I even think that you can get some sort of a stamp for being able to do it. So if this happens for a long time, or if it comes back after 5 years, 10 years, or even if it comes back regularly, and we will need 2 months of non-movement of peoples so that all possible future viruses won't have the time to spread, then the second day of the lockdown, you should start studying an online course, be it the history of Christianity and Islam, or theoretical physics, or social media, or deconstructing how David Lynch or George Lucas is using the camera to achieve the emotional impact of the shot that they always wanted. Do it, or if you really like computer games, learn how to program one. And then 2 months later, you will be a different person, and the value won't show in GDP, but it will show in your head DP. Head DP, did I just say head DP? I pretty much like it. All right, well, thank you very much. Thank you, my audience, and the applause is overwhelming, but I hope, and I'm also quite ready for it to be. Did I just beg for an applause? But thank you, and let me know in your comments how you liked it, and then, of course, questions and thoughts. I think we'll have a lot of time to think, and there's a lot of food for thought. I mean, to everybody who has eyes open, the world is full of interesting food for thought. Thank you very much.